Good evening. Welcome to tonight's shiur. Today is the Thursday of Parshas Bechukosay. We got to Motzei Shabbos Chazak. Let's go straight into the questions which we have for today. So, first of all, or before that, mentioned last week, Baruch Hashem, we've got the campaign for printing the Siddur Rabbeinu Hazakin. The goal has been a very expensive project to for the editing, so there is a goal of $60,000, and we've gotten about 17% so far. As Hashem, whoever wants to participate, you're very welcome to, and we'll be in touch. Let's go to the first question. So we have here a question about use of Listerine on Shabbos, where I'm talking about a medicated mouthwash. So let's put down the first point is we generally don't use medication on Shabbos unless it is a case of a chole she'ein b'sakana, or more serious than that. A chole she'ein b'sakana means a person who is unwell to the degree that they ought to be in bed. Could be that they are struggling and they are getting around, but that's the definition of a chole she'ein b'sakana. But for a lesser irritation, for a lesser condition, we don't take medicines on Shabbos. And that's because in the times of Chazal, it was common that people would make their own medicines, and the worry was that someone would come to prepare medicine on Shabbos. I once had a funny situation where someone called me up and he says, I know you shouldn't be taking medicine on Shabbos, but could I grind it myself? He knew that you're not allowed to take medicine. We didn't know you're not allowed to grind on Shabbos, which is the reason why we don't use medicine on Shabbos. Anyway, so here we have in Siman Shin Chav Ches. That's the dinim all about medication on Shabbos. Ein lo yatzin matztechi. One shouldn't be chewing mastic of some sort. V'lo shofin boyes hashinayim lirfuah, nor to rub the teeth with this mastic for healing. V'im mishum reach hapeh. But if you're doing it to relieve your breath, bad breath, then you are allowed to. Now, someone pointed out to me that the way this is quoted into the Alter Rebbe is slightly different. The first part is the same. You shouldn't be chewing mastechi, which is a kind of sraf. Sraf means like a sap, which is a latex or something from a tree, and one wouldn't rub your teeth with some kind of medication. And the Alter Rebbe then says, "Eimosai bizman shemiskaven lirafur." If you're doing so for refuah, avolim einim miskaven elo mishum reach hapeh muta. But if it's exclusively for bad breath, then it's okay. So where the Shulchan Aruch or Yosef Karo had written mishum reich hapeh is muta, the Alter Rebbe has kind of made it more emphasized. Eidim miskaven elo. So the question is, what happens if you're using this Listerine and you want it as a mouthwash, but also you want it as some kind of medical effect also. As I say, it's a medicated mouthwash, and in my ignorance, I'm imagining that the medicated means it's got some kind of some kind of healing power, and not only does it clean for the moment, but it's actually addressing a problem which the person has. That's my understanding of what it means. And so if you're doing it for dual purpose, so the Mechaber, you could read, I'm doing it for Reach HaPeh, that's okay. Well, the Alter Rebbe changes the wording and he says, Eino elo, Eino miskaven elo b'shom Reach HaPeh. But if you want to do it for a dual purpose, then that would not be okay. Now, let's go down on the screen. We've got here from the Piskei Teshuvos, and he comments on this. According to this rule, we can learn about the various kind of medicine, various preparations, which are to give a good taste, a fresh breath taste, etc. If they do not have a koyach hamrape, if they do not have a healing aspect, they're just it's a good smell to overpower the bad smell. Then there's no problem. But if they do have some kind of sterilizing effect to get rid of germs, which the germs are the ones which are causing the bad breath, then you wouldn't be allowed to use it on Shabbos. Yeah. So if it's purely cosmetic, then that's not a problem. But if it's got actually some healing power, that shouldn't be used on Shabbos. But before we finish off, he says, "V'in odem borihu." If the person is a healthy person, is not suffering from bad breath, and is just using it for hisran, for feeling fresh, or for hygiene, that would be okay. So this is like getting a little bit interesting. That you've got using a mouthwash. If the person has got no medical problem, I know some people have a medical problem that they have bad breath. And so then they would be more restricted to use this medicated mouthwash on Shabbos. But if it's not, they don't have a medical problem. They just like to have a fresh taste in their mouth, and they happen to use this medicated stuff. That's okay. And let's read back to the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, which is the basis of what the Piskei Teshuvos had said. He says, "Im ein lo michush klal." If there's a person who has no problem, no medical problem at all. He has no interest and no need for healing. He has another interest. He's having a sweet syrup. Or he's swallowing a raw egg. Not to heal anything, just to enhance his voice. That's mutter. So we have the idea that for even if it's got a medical benefit, but if you're not in need of the medical benefit, then that's okay. So let's say if you have you enjoy the taste of cough sweets, and you want to have a cough sweet because you enjoy the taste, so that would be okay, because you're not doing it for medical reasons. You're doing it just for I don't know, indulgence, whatever. So that would be okay. So just to finish off this point, using medicated mouthwash. A healthy person, that's not a problem. If the person does have a problem of the need to have this cleansing, then that becomes more an issue for Shabbos, that one shouldn't be using medicine on Shabbos. Let's go on to the next question. One of our regular listeners asked me about using a luminous watch. So we've got this kind of paint, which on some watches they have it on the numbers and on the hands. Actually, I've seen a hamapil card, which kids are encouraged to say hamapil when they're in bed, and so it's dark. So they have a glowing card where the hamapil letters come up and they glow. So are you allowed to use those things on Shabbos? So what you have in front of you on the screen is from the late Rav Falk of Gateshead, and he was asked this question. I'm sure many of you remember there was a time where you could get these thermometers, which were made of a plastic strip, and you put it on your forehead, and it would change color, and sometimes it would bring out actually numbers. You'd see 37, 38, whatever it may be. So are you allowed to use those on Shabbos? And then you got something else. You've got, let's say, glasses, which change, they react to sunlight. They begin to come dark in the sunlight. Now, that's generally accepted. That's okay to use them on Shabbos. We don't say, oh, you're coloring the glass. And whereas with the thermometers, those plastic strips thermometers, especially if they've got lettering, the psak there was not to use them on Shabbos. So now we're coming back to the use of luminous letters, let's read what he writes. So you've got here these luminous letters on a watch. So he says you are allowed to hold them in front of the light, even though as a result they will, when you go into the dark, they will be glowing. He says it's not comparable to what we've said about the celluloid strip, because these letters have been they've got this color. What's happened is that they've absorbed light, and that light which they absorb continues to radiate, to glow in a darker place. But he says I don't see it as coloring anything. Um, by contrast with the strip on the forehead, it's actually bringing out the letters. And therefore, that would be a problem of writing or coloring, etc. So he says that's not a problem to use luminous watch, or the hamatel cards would be the same thing to bring them into a dark room and now appreciate the light which they've absorbed. That would be okay. Let's move on to the next question. So one very fine Jew was helping his wife to put the kids to bed last Shabbos afternoon, and the next thing, it was late afternoon, and the next thing he wakes up, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. He lives in a northern region where 2 o'clock in the morning is already after alos hashachar. It's after dawn. So he sends me I only saw the WhatsApp in the morning. He sent me, by him it was 2 o'clock in the morning, by me it was 12 o'clock in the morning. But he's asking, what do I do now? So he did davened maariv, and then he was asking what to do about Sfiras Omer, what to do about Havdolo. So let's do one thing at a time. Let's first deal with maariv. And what's so interesting is that actually today, someone came to me with exactly the same question, that he was helping put the kids to sleep, and then he woke up. It's already after alos hashachar. What does he do about maariv, etc. So the first thing I told him, so I just discussed it last night in the Hebrew shiur. So here we have in Siman Reish Lamed Hey in Arachaim. So l'chatchila, one should be reading the Shema right after after the stars come out. The time is until Chatzos. If you violate it and you're after Chatzos until Amud HaShachar, you can still say Shema and you're okay. But then Sif Dalet says, if you read Shema after alos hashachar, but before sunrise, then you're only yotze if you're anos. So several years ago, when Shluchim moved out to Iceland, I spent a week or two working through a list of questions. And in Iceland, it does not get, in this time of the year, it doesn't, you never see stars. It doesn't get dark enough. It's like twilight for a couple of hours. So we're meant to say the Shema after Tzesa Kechovim. There is no Kechovim there. So what do? So the answer would be to wait till after Chatzos, which is Alamud HaShachar, but before sunrise. And that's because it's a case of onus. They are stuck, that's where they are. They don't have an earlier opportunity to say Shema because they don't have stars. So then that would be the time to say Shema after Chatzos, before, which there is already dawn, but before sunrise. That's the onus. Just if you are wondering, Chatzos in Iceland is 1:30 a.m. So it means getting up at 1:30 for these 2 months around every night, to get up at 1:30, 2 o'clock to say Shema, to be Yotze Mitzvah Shema. Okay, so let's come back. So again, if it's after alos hashachar, before sunrise, then you can still say the Shema if you're onus. Let's say the person was shikir before choyle. Okay, this would also be the case. Fell asleep looking after the children. Onus. Okay. Now, then he says, but if you're onus, you don't say hashkivein. It's ready after dawn, I think in this part of the world, dawn is now about perhaps 2 o'clock. No? Yeah, I think it's 12:58, which means 1:58. It's about 2 o'clock. So if you are davening, if you didn't daven maariv till after 2 o'clock in the morning, you would say the Birchas Krishma and Shema, but you would not say the brocho hashkivenu. Because once it's already after dawn, it's not called Zman Shchiva. It's not a time of sleeping, so you can't say hashkivenu. However, the other brochas, 2 before the Shema and Emes ve'emunah after Shema, you would say. So that's the person's davening maariv after alos hashachar would not say the brocho hashkivenu. Number one. What about Shmoyne Esrei? So what you can see in the notes here is that the Aruch HaShulchan says that you can daven Shmoyne Esrei, although I believe the Mishnah Berurah says you shouldn't daven Shmoyne Esrei. But okay, there is a machlokas whether the permission to say for the honest to daven, to say Shema during this margin between dawn and sunrise, does that also extend to Shmoyne Esrei? And this is a machlokas of Pasuk. Okay. That's as far as davening maariv. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, you can daven maariv, albeit with missing out something. Someone's asking a question. Which shitta do we take for dawn? So, okay, all right. So let's address that. There is I think, a rather narrow-minded shitta of saying that dawn is 72 minutes on the clock before sunrise, and that doesn't matter winter, summer, further north, further south, closer to the equator, 72 minutes. Based upon, it says in the Gemara, it's 4 million. The time it takes to walk 4 million, takes 18 minutes a meal, so 4 million is 72. The problem is that 72 minutes before dawn, so before sunrise, and at this time of the year, you could probably sit in the street and read a newspaper. All right, I know that we've got street lights, but even in the dark, when there's no artificial light, you probably could read in 72 minutes or 73 minutes before sunrise. To say that's before dawn, it just doesn't make sense. And certainly the Alter Rebbe and many other poskim take the view that dawn has to be calculated according to degrees. In other words, you say in Eretz Yisrael, 72 minutes before sunrise at the times of the equinox. So then that is when the sun is so many degrees beneath the horizon, 16 degrees beneath the horizon. Okay, so then we're going to replicate 16 degrees beneath the horizon in other places of the world. So we're going to do 72 minutes in degrees rather than 72 minutes flat on the clock. There are other shittas which say 90 minutes, 96 minutes, 120 minutes, but if we're going to keep to the 72 minutes, but still we wouldn't follow 72 minutes flat. And that's very confusing because you look in the Kehillah calendar over here, they put alos hashachar as 72 minutes flat before sunrise. Now, when it comes to a fast day, so they are allowing you to eat perhaps an hour later, then we would say, because we're saying it goes according to degrees. But then we get our advantage when it comes to Shavuos, staying up a whole night, because they have to wait till 72 minutes flat before sunrise, whereas we can go to sleep about 2 hours before sunrise. So you win some and you lose some. Okay, let's go further. So if you didn't daven Shemona Esrei, then the answer would be yes, you'd have to do 2 Shemona Esreis at Shacharis. Now, so this was the first part of the question, what to do about maariv. And so it's maariv, certainly not to say hashkivenu. Certainly, I'm not so certain, actually, because what's the argument? It's how can you say hashkivenu when it's time to get up, yeah? But really, look around, everyone's asleep. So how can you say You can't call it Zman Shchiva when it's 2 o'clock in the morning. Most of the population are asleep. Now, just to add to that, I may have discussed this before. When the Alter Rebbe says in the Siddur that after midnight in his northern region, after midnight from like Weimer, you can't count Sfira, and also when it comes to Shivos B'Tammuz, you mustn't eat after Chatzos because dawn is at midnight. Why does the Alter Rebbe not say you cannot say Hamapil? It was, I'm sure it was reasonably common that people would be up late. And why does you can't say Hamapil after Chatzos? The only justification I can say is because most people are asleep, therefore it's okay to say Hamapil. If once you can say Hamapil, why can't you say Hashkevenu? So I'm puzzled with that. Shkunoch says you can't say Hashkevenu, and the question is, do we modify that because of the conditions where we live? Okay, now coming back to about Havdolo. So we all know that if you didn't make Havdolo on Motzei Shabbos, you can still make Havdolo either, some say according to up till 3 days till Tuesday evening, and there are those who say only 1 day. But either way, Havdolo done on Sunday is done just Hagofen and the long brocho hamavdil, but not to make a brocho on the flame nor on the besomim. That's only done on Motzei Shabbos. This is the lashon. You can see the lashon of the Shulchan Aruch. And now you're going to ask me why it says Neir and Besomim, not Besomim and Neir. The answer is I don't know. Okay, let's move on. Question came my way about a person who bought a small blueberry bush. And according to Google or Wikipedia, blueberry bushes last for about, I think, 5 years or something. 7 years. It's not a long living bush. Meanwhile, they went to some garden center and bought a blueberry bush, and typically it comes with a bag with a certain amount of earth with it. And the question is, now, do I have to wait 3 years for Orloh from the planting, or can I say it's already a year and a half old, whatever it may be? Can I now can I just add on the from its birth, from its original planting, and now have 3 years from then? So here we have in Shulchan Aruch in Yeridea, Simereis Tzadik Dalad, Ilon she'akoroi ruach, a tree which was uprooted by wind, or shetofei nohor, or was washed away by a river. So now we've got this tree which has been transported from A to B, and with the earth which was around its roots. And the second location added some earth, and now it's taken root. If it could have survived with the mound of earth, that's the right word, the clump of earth, which came along with it, without adding more, then you can consider it still as if it were in the original place, you don't have to recount. But if it wouldn't be able to survive with the amount of earth which it floated downstream with, and you had to add earth, then you have to start Orloh all over again. Now, I'm just picturing a tree which is washed away with a river, with a flood. Then probably there's not much, probably a lot of the earth which it had around the roots would be washed away in the flood. In our case, we're talking about it's been cultivated in a nursery. They took a cutting, let's say, and then they put it around earth and it developed. And it can, I believe it could live a long time with the earth which it has in the pot or in the bag. It could live for, some say it has to be able to live for 3 years. And again, I'm not sure where that is a problem. And therefore, my inclination is to say it's not a problem, because it does have enough earth to live on. And so when you replanted it, you don't have to count Orloh all over again. Now, I know that in Eretz Yisrael, they are extremely machmir about this. And farmers, when they want to replant saplings from the nursery into their orchards, they do it. They have to have the rovers there, or the mashgiach, to see that they do it properly, and they don't transport it over concrete or over metal, so it shouldn't be disconnected from the earth. Now, the rule here is that in Eretz Yisrael, Suffolk Orloh is osir. In Chutz La'aretz, Suffolk Orloh is mutter. The margin of leniency in Chutz La'aretz is so much more, and once we have a Suffolk, a reasonable Suffolk, whether it is Orloh or not, then we can, in Chutz La'aretz, we're allowed to rely that it's not Orloh. So now, if you're going to say, could it live with the amount of earth come with from the garden center or not, you can rely on the Suffolk that it would be able to, and therefore you do not have to start Orloh again. So it's Orloh in Chutz La'aretz is osir, halacha l'Moshe Sinai, but same halacha Moshe Sinai is that Suffolk Orloh Chutz La'aretz is mutter. Okay, let's move on. So there's a fine lady. She's repairing her son's Tallis, and she's asking the question. It looks like around the original place, it's a bit damaged, and she's asking whether she could she wants to take off the old lining and put the new lining on where was the bottom of the Tallis. So is she allowed to repair the Tallis, and now it'll be upside down to the way it was till now? She's asking whether you're allowed to or not. So here you see clearly from the Arizal. This is from the Shulchan Aruch Arizal, but this is also in various Kisvei Arizal, that it's not a problem, but ein lahakpid. You don't have to put a simon on the talus. You should always have one side of the talus to your head, as the Ashkenazim do. Ki ein shorish leminagahu. There is no source for that. Now this is, I believe, the background for the Minig Chabad, that we do not have a Torah. We do not have a ornate piece of cloth, or even more fancy. The Polish tend to have, Polish Chassidim tend to have silver Torahs with. It's all very beautiful, but according to the Arizal, there's no point in having any marking, which is the top of the talus, which is the bottom of the talus. So according to the Arizal, it's not necessary. And Chabad seem to be following that, and that's why we do not have an Torah on the outside. We still have an Torah. We still have a silk lining on the inside. That's actually, for this moment, I don't remember whether that's any possibly just for convenience, but okay. But it's not a problem to turn it around upside down. That's how I felt according to this Arizal. Someone once told me, what's the reason why we have a silk lining of the talus? So, and it's, by the way, if you have experience, the silk wears away much sooner than a cotton lining. So, and if you wear on Shabbos a silk kapota and you've got a silk talus lining, then you'll be busy pulling your talus and adjusting it the whole time, because it's slippery against slippery. So someone told me a svara that actually there's a mile of dafka, that the talus should be slipping, so that you shouldn't forget that you're wearing a talus. Like you have an idea that you shouldn't forget that you're wearing your tefillin. We remember that Rebbe was, during davening, continually, it was much more than the few times to touch the towel, the shiyad and shel-rosh. It was many, many times during davening you could see that Rebbe touching the shiyad and shel-rosh. And there's an idea not to forget about it. So this svara about the talus having a more slippery, to encourage that you should remember that you're wearing a talus. That's a cute idea. Possibly, though, that silk is obviously a more beautiful fabric than cotton, and so also hiddur mitzvah to have a silk lining, and also silk on the corners. Actually, someone asked me yesterday about this corners of his talus. The cloth is worn out. Is it important to repair it? Are you allowed to repair it? So if you wanted to replace the lining on the corners of your tallis, so you have a problem that the tzitzis are in the way. But I don't see a problem if it's really bothering you. I don't see a problem getting a square of silk or whatever fabric you want, square of white fabric, and to sew it over and the tzitzis can still remain where they are. They won't be visible from the inside of the tallis, but they'll from the outside of the tallis. Sorry. I think I'm mixing up. That would work with a tallis cotton. I don't think it would work very well with a tallis godel because the tzitzis come on both sides, so that wouldn't work. Yeah, okay. Let's move on. So one of our listeners asked me for some clarification about hamarachim and vehamarachim. So in our siddur, we have, sometimes it says in moedim, hamarachim, sometimes it says vehamarachim. Simple history is that one is nusach Ashkenaz and one is nusach Sfard. What you have on the top here is the Redelheim siddur, and it's nusach Ashkenaz, it's vehamarachim. What you have in the middle picture is from a siddur printed in Venezia, Venice, Reish Pei Daled. This is before the Arizal was born, and apparently the Arizal used this print of the siddur. And when the Arizal said to make changes, he was referring to changes in the wording. He was referring to this siddur. That's what Reb Chaim Vital tells us. This is Venezia Reish Pei Daled. And you can see there it's hamarachim. So hamarachim vehamarachim is a difference between Ashkenaz and Sfard. But the curious thing is in our siddur, so you'll see if you check, in the weekday davening, it's going to be hamarachim, and in the Shabbos davening, it's vehamarachim. That's how it is in the current Chabad Siddurim. What you have over here on the bottom of the page is from the first print of the Chabad Siddur, printed in assumed to be from Shklov Tovkov Samach Gimel, and here it's at Mincha of Shabbos. It's the only time it has the Hamarachim. At Shacharis and at Musaf and at Friday night, it's there. It has Hamarachim. The only time it has Hamarachim is at Mincha of Shabbos. That's in the first print. In the later prints, it's Hamarachim on the Shabbat whenever it's on Shabbos and Yom Tov. It's Hamarachim. Okay, so these are the facts. What's the reasons for this? So now we've got the pioneer in exploring the Alter Rebbe Siddur is certainly the first pioneer is Avrom David Lavut, the Rebbe's Zayda, who was Rov in Nikolaev. So he addresses this in the Shar HaKoilel, which is a whole study of the Siddur, and he says in the Sidurim Horishonim, it says Hamarachim in the weekdays. On Shabbos, it says Vehamarachim with a Vav. Now, apparently, he did not have the print of Shklov, which we have. It looks like he didn't have it. Otherwise, he would have commented. And then the other tefillas, it's not so clear, because in many of the tefillas, which come, like say, Rosh Chodesh, it doesn't have the last three brachas. By Ritzei, it says, Ritzei your moedim, find somewhere else. So he says, Sha'alnu, we asked the Chassid Reb Hillel Paritsha. So Reb Hillel Paritsha is a Chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, primarily. He was the one who saw the altar. He heard the altar, but didn't see him. Whole story, I don't go into it now. So Reb Hillel Paritsha, so the Rav Lavut is saying, we asked Reb Hillel Paritsha, and he said, in the weekdays, it's Hamarachim. On Shabbos, has to be ve'amrachim. Musaf Rosh Chodesh Chol HaMoed Sofek. V'lo zachinu l'tayim. And he doesn't know the explanation. Right. So that's the beginning of the Ashara Kolom. And now he goes into a fascinating study on this. And he says that we see that in Moedim, there's a point of having 12 Vavs, Vav HaMosifin. He goes into detail. You have Vitzaharoim, No, so it goes earlier. Ve'al niflesecha v'toivesecha vovoiker, and then he counts a list of 12 vovs, of vov moisif, yeah, of the prefix vov. So there's a deal. There should be 12. Here has ve'al nishmesein ve'al nisech ve'al niflesecha v'toivesecha vovoiker v'tzaroim ve'al kulam ve'yisraim ve'yisnasim v'cholachayim v'hal levezosein. So he says there's an emphasis here. There should be dafka 12 vovs. And what's the point of the 12 vovs here? So he says that because on Shabbos for Yom Tov, Shemona Esrei is shortened. There's only the 3 opening brochas and 3 ending brochas, starting from Ritzei, Moedim, and Sim Shalom. The middle brocha of Shabbos, this doesn't count. Okay. So he says that the interest here is that there should be, even on a Shabbos, should be also the number 18. So how do you get the 18? Well, you've got 6 brachas, and then you've got 12 times the vovs. So as if you have 12 hoidoyos, and in that way, the 12 and the 6 combined, you have the number 18. Then he says, we see elsewhere also that there is, and then I missed out something, and then we know that we have actually the Shemona Esrei is 19 brachas, because there's an extra bracha which is added at a later stage of Vala Malshinim. So he says, let's look, according to Arizal, whenever there's a number of 8, a figure configuration of 18, there's actually an extra one corresponding to the Birchas Haminim. So, for example, in the morning brachas, originally there were 18 brachas, and we have an added bracha, that's in Hanois and Layoav Koyach, which is added later. In Yehich Void, were 18 psukim, and then there's a 19th pasuk, Rabbis Machshavas Belev Ish, which is not a pasuk in Tilim. If I'm not mistaken, it's a pasuk in Eiv, that was added to make up the number 19. Then he goes to the whole thing about an En Kelekenu, Mi Kelekenu, Ein Kelekenu, Mi Kelekenu, Noida Lekenu is Rosh Tevis Amen, Ein Mi Noida, Baruch Elekenu, Atahu Elekenu, that's Baruch Ata, and then in the 2 psukim before, you have Kavel Hashem, Chazak, Kavel Hashem, and Kadesh Hashem. You got the name Yud Kevavke, 4 names. So it's as if you have 4 times Baruch Atah Hashem and 4 times Omein, and because it's made up of 12 sentences or phrases, therefore it's as if you got 12 times in Baruch Atah Hashem and Omein. Okay, and then so that's the 12. And then you have Atososhienu, the added one, so Atososhienu is the 13th. So what he's saying is that there is a cheshbon of having 12, and then there's a cheshbon of the 13th corresponding to V'la Malshinim and Alos and Layoav Koyach, and that's why. So then that's why you have this extra vov in Moedim. So again, there's 12 vovs in Moedim, but then on a regular weekday, you don't need to have a remez to V'la Malshinim because it's there already. But on Shabbos, when you don't have the middle brachas, there's more the need of representation of all the 13 brachas, and therefore the Ve Hamrachim is added. So according to his formula, whenever it's an abbreviated Shemona Esrei, it's Ve Hamrachim. When it's the full Shemona Esrei, 19 brachas, it's Hamrachim. When it's the abbreviated Shemona Esrei, it's Ve Hamrachim. That's the formula of Rav Lavut. And that bears true in the way the Siddur is printed in our own, in what's available to us, not true in the first print. Having said all that, the Rebbe wasn't like this way, and what we can see very clearly, or hear very clearly, whenever it's a day that we don't say Tachnun, the Rebbe would say V'eh HaMerachim. So even at Shachris, even if it's the full Shemona Esrei, the Rebbe would say on the day She'einem V'eh Tachnun, the Rebbe would say V'eh HaMerachim, and otherwise the Rebbe would say HaMerachim. So he obviously had a different understanding to what his Zayda had about this. Right. Someone is pointing out here, first of all, going back to the Tallis, that this silk has less of a worry of sharpness. Okay. The other thing is saying, does if I've said from the Arizal, he has no problem of the Tallis being upside down, this person seems to remember that one should make a simon, what is the back of the Tallis cotton and what is the front of the Tallis cotton. I've never heard of that actually, and certainly according to the Arizal, it doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense. Might be wrong. And by the way, what do you do if the front of your Tallis cotton developed a stain? So you turn it around and you have it, put the stain to the back and you continue wearing it, yeah, until you get a chance to wash it. Okay, that's for those people who have their Tallis cotton not tucked in, so they have these problems. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so I'm on duty once a week at the base Orloh in Stamford Hill, and someone calls up and he says he went to Sainsbury's to buy some groceries. And in Sainsbury's, there's a self-checkout. And you go there and well, there's someone there looking, but the point he comes home and he realizes that he had, there were a couple of items in his shopping basket which he didn't pay for. So there is a famous line of Torah's goy mutter. If you don't mind, I'm going to tell you a story. So there's a fellow who, a Rov in a small town, and there's a yeshuvnik who comes occasionally to ask shiurs. And then after a long time, he hadn't come, then he comes again, and the Rov says, I haven't seen you such a long time. So he says, well, actually, I've been managing on my own most of the time. So how do you manage on your own with your shiurs? So he says, well, I know there's a rule that Torah's goy mutter. If a goy makes a mistake, it's okay. So therefore, if the kitchen help, the shiksa, if she by mistake puts some milchik into the fleishika pot, it's a Torah's which the goy did. Therefore, it's mutter. That was his interpretation of Torah's goy mutter, which is absolutely wrong. So these are the shiurs he paskins on his own. When it's a shiur whether a piece of meat is kosher or treif, so he knows that treif has to be given to the dog. It says that like hela tashlichon oisay. So whenever he had a question, is the piece of chicken treif or kosher, he would go over to the dog and offer it to the dog, and the dog would paskin. So then the Rov says, so you're doing fine, why do you come to me? So he says, well, the dog seems to be very machmir about treif of meat. So everything's treif for him. So, okay. So coming back, so there is this expression of Torah's goy mutter. If a goy makes a mistake, it's permitted. So let's look at that. So we have here from the Alter Rebbe in Hilchos Gezela, where it says that you're not allowed to la'ashoik. La'ashoik means to somehow withhold funds from someone, and explains what does it mean. Well, someone else's properties come your way willingly. The person gave you a loan or a rental, whatever it may be, and if you don't pay that, don't repay the loan, etc., or you didn't pay the rent, so that's called oishek. You're withholding someone else's funds, and that issur of oishek is b'Yisrael, but not b'nochri. That's provided there's no chilul Hashem involved. Let's say if you'd borrowed money from a nochri and he passed away, you don't have to divulge the situation to the heirs, etc. If they know that you're lying, then you're not allowed to deny it because of chilul Hashem. Now, then it goes further. Even if it's not aware, that's only as far as not paying a debt. But if there is an article in your possession, it's just very interesting, is differentiating between not repaying a debt. Now, when you borrow money, you spend it. So then the debt is abstract. You have a debt to pay, but there's no specific article which belongs to the guy. But if you had borrowed a specific article, chair, whatever, maybe a spade, if that's be'en, then you would not be allowed to deny to the heirs that you don't have it, because that would be considered gzela. So again, if it's not a abstract debt, but it's a physical article which doesn't belong to you, you have a duty to give it back. And Torah Goy doesn't work here. And then he says further, when you buy something from a Goy, you're not allowed to deceive them in as far as buying the price, etc. And that we had a couple of weeks ago in Posuk, V'chishav im koineyu. If a Goy had bought a Jewish person as a slave, so it says about buying him out, buying him, redeeming that slave, V'chishav im koineyu, you have to make a calculation. Rashi goes and hold the discussion. You bought him for so many years, and how much per year, and then you pay the difference. So therefore, he says, when you are buying an article, you wouldn't be allowed to mislead them on the price, because that's like stealing. And it goes further, even Genevas Das isn't allowed. It says elsewhere, to sell something, even to a nochri, and you sell him meat as if it thinks kosher and it's actually tray for meat, would also be forbidden. If the Goy made a mistake on his own, and the Nechil Hashem, then you'd be allowed to, he's given you, you're selling stuff and he makes a mistake on his own, you didn't deceive, then you'd be allowed to be quiet. And that is, and he says actually, say, see that I'm relying on you, you're counting, I'm relying on you. So that seems to be very, very clear then, that if a person walked out of a shop with several items he didn't pay for, that does not fall into the category of Torah's Goy Mutter, because the Goy did not make a mistake. It's a Torah's, it's a Geneva by mistake. The Yid had stolen by mistake. So I don't see any heter to not pay that. Yeah, it's just right. Right. Last week we had a discussion, or 2 weeks ago, about someone who had not counted Sfira Sunday night, and on Monday night he went to shul and he answered brocho, and then he realized he hasn't, but it's still day. He's asking whether he has to, whether he can still count yesterday's Sfira and continue to count with the brocho. And we said he can. But one of our listeners pointed out that actually brocho being a cutoff point, that you no longer have yesterday, it's a new day, that's true for Shabbos. It's not true for a weekday. So my classic example, which I discussed, I think then, you're at a chasana at Rosh Chodesh, and in middle of the meal, you went out and davened maariv. By the time you finish the meal, it's ready after Rosh Chodesh, but because you davened maariv, you cannot say Yalla v'yovei. If you hadn't davened maariv, then you can say Yalla v'yovei because you started the meal when it was still Rosh Chodesh. What happens if you didn't daven maariv, but you answered brocho? So is brocho a cutoff that you can't say Yalla v'yovei? That's really the question. And we don't have any evidence for that. On the contrary, it seems to be quite clear that brocho, as in switching your date, is only true for Shabbos, because making it Lailo means it's Shabbos, and then you wouldn't be able to go back, largely. Whereas brocho during the week, it does not make it Lailo, so therefore the question really wasn't a question in the first place, unless the person had actually davened maariv, and then is asking, can I still kind of retrieve yesterday and go and count yesterday's Sfira, which would be interesting. Okay. What else did we have? So last week we had a whole discussion about the origins of the leniency with Kli Shlishi. So Rav Michoel Lerner, who's a Rosh HaKollel in Crown Heights on Montgomery Street. So he sent me, I mentioned last week, there's a Sefer HaYireim from Rebbe Lezer of Metz, who says not to use Kli Sheni, not to use Kli Shlishi. And so he says that this Sefer, the Sefer HaYireim, was printed from manuscript only in, I don't know, the last 150 years or something, not so long ago. And therefore, the Pri Megadim, etc., who are saying that Kli Shlishi is more lenient than Kli Sheni, they didn't have the Sefer HaYireim. And therefore, he's bringing also from a Sefer called Shvisas HaShabbos, who says that people who are particular, medaktikim, would be careful to avoid being lenient, even the Kli Shlishi, is if it's Yatziledes boy, following the opinion of the Rebbe Lezer of Metz and Sefer HaYereim. Okay, that's what that was interesting. I thought, feedback. I wanted to share that with you. Finally, last week we had the discussion about Mezonos and Hamotzi and the whole fascinating word of the Alter Rebbe of not wanting to miss out on Takonas Moshe. If you remember, the person said alamichyo instead of full benching, and whether you can whether you're yotze b'di'evet. That was our discussion. So meanwhile, it came up that the Alter Rebbe talks about a bread which was fried, not baked, but was fried. And the Alter Rebbe says if you have a large amount, your soveya, then you should be conscientious about Takonas Moshe, and therefore don't just do alamichya on it. Have it during a meal. So one of our listeners asked me, what about waffles? So waffles are made like a kind of batter, poured into some kind of, a waffle maker. It's like a toaster, which has got shapes like a mold, and you fill it with this batter, and it becomes actually like a sponge cake, but a bit stronger, a bit tougher than a sponge cake. So if you have a large amount of that you are satisfied, you have it for your breakfast, or going to keep you going for the next few hours, would that be an issue of Kovei Suda? So at first, I was thinking the Alter Rebbe in Sif Yud Aleph there says if you've got this runny dough, and he says, and it's been fried in mashke, he says it's mezonos, even if you're soveya, because it's not called lechem at all. So that gave me the impression, oh, well, that's perhaps the waffles is made with a blila racho, it's a runny mixture. And he says it's mezonos, even if you have a shiur kriya suda, and it's soveya. But then looking a bit further back, we have the following. We have truknin. Truknin is that there's a mixture of flour and water, and it's a runny mixture, but it's poured into a cavity in the oven, and it then becomes quite a bit thicker after baking. Or that then could be in a pan. So that's called truknin, and this clearly, if you have a larger amount, that would be called lechem, and you'd have to say hamotzi and full benching. So let's say something like a sponge cake. If there was no bread at home and you had, for lunch, you had several slices of sponge cake and you had a shiur svir, do you have a question of hamotzi and full benching? And I think the answer is yes, you do. There is the previous quote is talking when it was fried or something. But if it's poured into a tin and it's baked, then it does have a gather of lechem. And if you're kaveh suda, or you have a shiur svir, so then I think it would be an issue of having to say the full benching. Okay, just for those who joined us a little bit later, Baruch Hashem, the project of publishing the Siddur has been launched, and it's on its way. We've managed to reach to 17% of $60,000, and anyone out there who's game to give a hakdosha, to make a dedication, you can go to Kahot, and the dedication is available. If you have a dedication of $500 or more, then you have a line to print in a hakdosha, and you'll also get a complimentary set when it comes out. So very welcome to do that. Meanwhile, I wish you all a good night, a good Shabbos. I want you to hear Soros Tovos, Klal Yisrael, especially in Eretz HaKodesh. We should say here, Pidyon Shvuyim, and all of us should be redeemed from Golus with Moshiach Tzidkenu. Altiv.